The funeral of his uncle was not a big event. Only close relatives and a few neighbors came, standing quietly in the old countryside church. His uncle had never been a rich or famous man. In fact, most people thought of him as a strange person who lived alone, fixing odd things in his shed, collecting tools and machines that nobody else understood. When he passed away, many whispered that he had left behind nothing valuable. They believed his life had been wasted, filled with tinkering instead of achievements. But to him, this uncle had been more than just a lonely old man. He was family, and he had always spoken to him with warmth. When the will was read a few days later, all the family members gathered in the small lawyer's office. Everyone waited impatiently, hoping for some surprise inheritance. Some thought there might be land, hidden savings, or maybe even old gold coins. His uncle had lived simply, but sometimes simple men hide secret treasures. Everyone's faces showed quiet greed except his. He just wanted to hear his uncle's name one more time. The lawyer opened the old envelope and read slowly. The house, the land, and a small bank account went to different relatives. People nodded, some smiled, some frowned at the small amounts. Then came the part that made the entire room laugh. "And to my nephew," the lawyer said, "I leave my most important creation, the machine in my shed." The words fell flat in the room. For a moment there was silence. Then someone chuckled. Another cousin whispered loudly, "A pile of junk, that's what he gets." Laughter spread. Even the lawyer looked unsure, glancing up as if wondering if it was a mistake. But no, it was written clearly in the uncle's handwriting. The machine was his. Everyone mocked him openly. "What are you going to do with that old trash?" one aunt said. "You can't even sell it for parts," another added. His cousin smirked, saying, "Guess Uncle didn't love you enough to leave you something real." Their words cut like small knives, but he stayed quiet. Deep inside, he felt confused, maybe even embarrassed. Why had his uncle left him this? Was this some kind of joke? Still, when the family left the lawyer's office, he drove to the old house. The shed stood at the back, wooden doors cracked and rusty from years of rain. He pushed them open, and there it was, the worthless machine. It stood tall, covered in dust with thick wires tangled around it. Metal plates, screws, and strange handles stuck out in odd places. It looked like a typewriter had been welded to a radio, with pieces of an engine hanging off the side. Anyone who saw it would have thought the same thing. Junk. But when he stepped closer, his chest tightened. There was something about it. Maybe it was the way the machine seemed carefully built, not just thrown together, or maybe it was the memory of his uncle's voice. He remembered the last conversation they had, weeks before the illness took him. His uncle had leaned in, eyes serious, and whispered, "There's more inside than they'll ever see. Don't let them laugh it away." At the time, he didn't understand. Now those words echoed loudly in his mind. He wiped his hand across the top of the machine, leaving a trail in the thick dust. For a moment, he imagined his uncle working here late at night, turning screws, making notes, whispering to himself. Everyone else saw a recluse, a man wasting his days. But maybe, just maybe, there was a secret no one had noticed. Loading the machine into his old truck was no easy task. It was heavy, and the wheels of the trolley squeaked under the weight. His relatives stood nearby, watching with mocking smiles. One cousin shouted, "Hey, don't hurt yourself with that useless thing." Another added, "Maybe you can use it as a table in your garage." Their laughter followed him as he pushed the machine, sweating under the effort. He clenched his jaw but said nothing. Every step felt harder, not just because of the weight, but because of the shame pressing on his shoulders. Yet deep inside, a tiny spark of curiosity pushed him forward. Why would his uncle leave this to him and not to anyone else? Why call it his most important creation? Finally, with a loud thud, the machine rested on the back of his truck. He tied it down with ropes, making sure it wouldn't fall during the drive. As he climbed into the driver's seat, he glanced back once more. Through the cracked shed door, he saw the shadows of old tools hanging on the wall, dusty jars filled with bolts and piles of wood. It felt like leaving behind a piece of his uncle's soul. The ride home was long and silent. The machine rattled in the back, making strange noises with every bump on the road. At one point, he thought he heard a faint humming, but perhaps it was just his imagination. Night was falling, the sky turning shades of orange and purple. His mind kept returning to his uncle's words like a riddle waiting to be solved. When he finally pulled into his driveway, his neighbor came out. The old man squinted at the machine and asked, "What on earth is that thing?" He explained it was his inheritance. The neighbor laughed and shook his head. "Son, you should have asked for cash instead. That's nothing but scrap." He smiled weakly but said nothing. After the neighbor left, he stood in his garage with the machine, staring at it under the dim light bulb. Dust danced in the air. It felt both heavy and alive, like it carried a secret. He traced his fingers along the cold metal and noticed small carvings on the side, letters scratched by hand. They spelled his uncle's initials. At that moment, he felt both sadness and determination. Sadness that his uncle had been laughed at in life and even in death. Determination that he would not let the laughter erase his uncle's work. He whispered softly as if speaking to the man himself, "I don't know what this is, but I'll find out." I promise. That night he barely slept. The voices of his relatives replayed in his head, mocking him. Yet beneath their laughter was his uncle's final clue. There's more inside than they'll ever see. He didn't yet understand what it meant. But he knew one thing clearly. This machine, this so-called worthless inheritance, had chosen him. The world thought it was nothing. He was about to learn it was everything. The next morning, sunlight streamed into the garage through the half-open door. The machine stood there, large and silent, almost like a stubborn guest that refused to leave. He had hardly slept during the night. Every time he closed his eyes, his uncle's words returned like an echo. There's more inside than they'll ever see. Those words were no longer just advice, they had become a challenge. He brewed himself a cup of coffee and sat on an old stool facing the machine. At first glance, it looked like nothing but a strange mix of metal parts, screws, and levers. The dust still clung to the corners and the wires dangled like vines. But he knew there had to be more. His uncle had never been careless. If he had spent years building this, then it must have meant something. He decided to start simple. He found a rag and a bucket of water, and for the next hour he wiped down every inch of the machine. With every swipe, new details came into view. Scratches, numbers, small markings that seemed deliberate. On the side of one panel, he noticed faint pencil drawings, arrows pointing toward a tiny screw. Curious, he leaned closer. Was it just random doodling, or was his uncle leaving a sign? He grabbed his toolbox and unscrewed the small panel. To his surprise, it revealed a hidden compartment no bigger than a lunchbox. Inside, neatly tucked away, was a folded piece of paper. His hand shook as he pulled it out. It was a note written in his uncle's familiar handwriting. It read, "If you are reading this, it means you did not give up. Good. This machine is not just metal. It is an idea. I built it to prove something, though the world never cared. Keep looking. The truth is inside." His heart raced. He could almost hear his uncle's voice reading those lines. He pressed the paper to his chest, feeling a strange mix of grief and excitement. The laughter of his family still rang in his memory, but now it was softened by the whisper of possibility. Fueled by curiosity, he searched the machine more carefully. He pressed buttons, turned knobs, and tried to trace the wires. Some were connected to small copper coils, others disappeared into sealed boxes. After hours of staring, he realized he couldn't figure it out alone. He wasn't an engineer. He only knew basic mechanics. Still, he wasn't ready to quit. He decided to test if the machine even worked. He found an old extension cord, plugged it into the wall, and carefully attached the other end to what looked like a power socket on the machine. For a moment, nothing happened. Then he flipped a switch. Sparks flew and a loud crackling sound filled the air. Alarmed, he quickly pulled the plug out. Smoke rose from the wires. His heart pounded. Had he just broken his uncle's life's work? Discouraged, he sat on the stool, head in his hands. Maybe his relatives were right. Maybe this really was just junk. But then, as the smoke cleared, his eyes caught something unusual. Beneath the machine, where the metal casing was slightly bent, he noticed another latch. This one was tiny, almost invisible. With careful fingers, he pulled it open. Inside was a small locked box built into the machine's frame. It was solid and heavy, with a simple keyhole. He searched every drawer in his garage, hoping his uncle had left the key somewhere. Hours passed, but nothing turned up. Finally, when he had almost given up, he remembered the words on the first note. Keep looking. Maybe the key was hidden on the machine itself. He crouched down and inspected every corner, every bolt. Then, underneath one of the side handles, taped carefully with old brown tape, he found it. A tiny brass key. His hands trembled as he unlocked the box. It clicked open with a soft sound. Inside lay a stack of small leather notebooks, their pages yellowed with time. On the first page of the top notebook in bold handwriting were the words, "The Generator Project." He flipped through the pages quickly. Diagrams filled the sheets with arrows, numbers, and notes written in the margins. Some of the drawings looked like parts of the machine, while others were designs for things he couldn't recognize. Phrases jumped out at him. Runs without fuel, magnetic field rotation, self-sustaining energy. He froze, staring at the words. Could this be true? Had his uncle been working on some kind of engine that didn't need fuel? His mind raced with questions. If it was real, why had nobody known? Why hadn't his uncle shown the world? Or had he tried only to be ignored? His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the garage door. It was his friend Mark, dropping by to return a tool he had borrowed. Mark stepped in and immediately noticed the large machine. "What in the world is that?" he asked with a laugh. "It's my uncle's invention," he replied, unsure how much to explain. Mark raised an eyebrow. "Looks like something from a junkyard. You sure it isn't just scrap?" He hesitated, but decided to show him the notebook. Mark skimmed a few pages before bursting out laughing. "Come on, man. A generator that runs without fuel? That's impossible. If it worked, your uncle would have been a millionaire. Don't waste your time." His chest tightened. He felt the sting of mockery again, just like from his relatives. But unlike them, he didn't argue. He simply closed the notebook and said quietly, "Maybe, but I need to know for sure." After Mark left, he sat with the notebook spread out on the workbench. The handwriting was messy in places, but the passion in the words was clear. His uncle had believed in this project with his whole heart. He traced the lines of a diagram with his finger, imagining the old man working late at night, ignored and ridiculed, but never giving up. He decided then and there he would try to rebuild whatever was missing. Even if he failed, at least he would honor his uncle's effort. That evening, he drove to the hardware store and bought wires, bolts, and a small set of copper coils. He didn't know exactly what he was doing, but the notes gave him enough clues to start. Over the next few days, he worked every night after his job, tightening screws, replacing damaged wires, and adjusting small gears. Sometimes the machine buzzed weakly, then fell silent. Sometimes sparks flew, making him jump back, but each failure only made him more determined. Slowly, the machine began to look less like a pile of junk and more like a real invention. One night, as he adjusted the final coil according to a page marked Test Sequence 3, he felt a surge of anticipation. He turned the crank on the side just as the notes described. At first, nothing happened. Then, with a soft hum, the machine shuddered. The sound grew louder. Suddenly, a small light bulb he had connected to its wires flickered, then glowed. His breath caught. The machine was working. He stepped back, eyes wide, staring at the glowing bulb. There was no fuel tank, no battery, no external power, yet the light shone steady and strong. It wasn't much, but it was real. In that moment, he knew his uncle had been right. This was no worthless machine. This was the beginning of something extraordinary. The small light bulb glowing on the workbench filled him with more excitement than any treasure could have. He stood frozen, staring at it as if it were a miracle. The hum of the machine was steady, almost like a heartbeat. He reached out, touched the glass bulb, and felt its warmth. It was not his imagination. The machine was really producing power. For a long moment, he didn't know what to do. His chest tightened with pride and disbelief. Then he laughed softly to himself. "Uncle, you really did it," he whispered. His uncle had been mocked all his life for wasting time on useless gadgets. Yet here, in this garage, proof was glowing in front of him. But the excitement quickly turned into questions. If the machine worked, why had his uncle kept it hidden? Why hadn't he shown the world? Why give it only to him? He walked around it slowly, studying the moving parts. Some gears clicked smoothly, while others looked worn and fragile. He realized this was only a prototype, an unfinished model. The notebooks were full of ideas, but they also showed signs of struggle. Pages had scribbles, crossed-out designs, and notes like, "must refine" and "unstable after long use." Still, the fact that it worked at all was astonishing. He grabbed another bulb, connected it to the wires, and turned the crank again. This time, both bulbs lit up. He clapped his hands, unable to stop smiling. But then, after a few minutes, the light flickered and dimmed. The machine shuddered and went silent. He frowned. Clearly, it wasn't perfect. Maybe that was why his uncle had never revealed it. It could work for short bursts but not for long periods. His uncle must have spent years trying to fix this weakness, and now that task had fallen to him. The next morning, he called in sick at work. He couldn't stop thinking about the machine. He spent the whole day going through the notebooks, making sense of the diagrams. His knowledge was limited, but his determination was strong. He circled words he didn't understand and looked them up online. The more he read, the more he realized how advanced his uncle's thinking had been. That evening, his cousin Peter stopped by. Peter had been one of the loudest voices mocking him during the will reading. "So," Peter said with a smirk, "how's your golden machine? Turned into gold yet?" He didn't answer right away. He wanted to show Peter, but something inside told him to wait. He wasn't ready for more laughter, especially if the machine failed in front of him. Instead, he just smiled politely. "Still working on it," he said. Peter shrugged. "Well, don't waste too much time. Scrap prices are low anyway." He laughed and walked away. He clenched his fists but stayed silent. He knew what he had seen. That glowing bulb was more valuable than gold. One day, Peter would see it too. Days turned into weeks. Every night after finishing his regular job, he returned to the garage. He replaced old wires, tightened gears, and followed his uncle's detailed notes. Sometimes he succeeded, sometimes he failed. Once the machine overheated, filling the garage with smoke. Another time the crank jammed and nearly snapped. But with each problem, he learned more. There were moments of doubt. At midnight, with grease on his hands and frustration in his chest, he would wonder if he was wasting his life just as others said his uncle had done. But then he would remember the light bulb glowing. That single moment was enough to keep him going. One Saturday afternoon, he invited his childhood friend Anna to see it. Unlike others, Anna had always respected his uncle. She had grown up next door and often saw the old man working late in his shed. When she entered the garage, she raised her eyebrows. "This looks complicated," she said. He nodded. "It's my uncle's machine. Everyone thinks it's worthless. But watch this." He connected 2 bulbs and turned the crank. The machine hummed and the bulbs lit up, glowing brightly. Anna gasped and stepped closer. "Wait, there's no battery? No power source?" "None," he said proudly. She covered her mouth with her hands. "This is incredible." Her reaction filled him with relief. Finally, someone believed. She picked up one of the notebooks and skimmed through the pages. He was working on a self-sustaining generator. "This is ahead of its time," he smiled. "I think he wanted me to finish what he started." For the first time, he felt hope that he wasn't crazy. Someone else could see the value. Anna encouraged him to keep working. "Don't let their laughter stop you," she said firmly. With her support, his determination grew stronger. He started ordering special parts online, saving money from his job. Each delivery felt like a step forward. New copper wires, magnetic coils, and fresh gears replaced the old worn ones. Slowly, the machine's hum became smoother, the bulbs brighter. One night after finishing another repair, he decided to test it again. This time he connected not just bulbs, but a small desk fan. He cranked the handle. The machine whirred to life and the fan blades began to spin. Cool air brushed against his face. He laughed out loud, unable to believe it. The machine could power more than lights. It could power real devices. But again, after about 10 minutes, the machine slowed and stopped. The same weakness remained. His uncle's notes had warned about it. Energy fades, system unstable, needs breakthrough. He sighed, but instead of giving up, he wrote his own notes in the margin. Possible heat issue, maybe magnetic alignment. It was no longer just his uncle's project, it was becoming his too. Then came the day that changed everything. Anna suggested he take the machine to the local university. "You need experts," she said. "If this is real, they can help you improve it. Otherwise, you'll always be stuck in this garage." At first, he resisted. He feared more laughter, more humiliation. But deep down, he knew she was right. The world deserved to know. And his uncle deserved recognition. He arranged a meeting with a professor in the engineering department. When he arrived with the bulky machine loaded onto a cart, students passing by gave curious looks. Some whispered and chuckled. He felt the familiar sting of doubt, but he pushed on. Inside the lab, the professor, a gray-haired man with sharp eyes, looked skeptical. "You say this produces electricity without fuel?" "Yes," he replied nervously. "Please, let me show you." He connected a bulb and turned the crank. The machine hummed and the bulb lit up brightly. The professor's eyes widened. He leaned in, adjusting his glasses. There's no external source? None, he said. Other faculty members gathered around. They examined the machine, touched the wires, and whispered to each other. Their faces shifted from disbelief to curiosity, then to something deeper. Concern, maybe even fear. After several minutes, the professor straightened up. This shouldn't be possible, he murmured. And yet, here it is. For the first time, strangers, educated experts, took his uncle's machine seriously. He stood there, heart pounding, realizing that the world was about to change. The machine sat in the middle of the university laboratory like an uninvited guest, humming softly as the bulb glowed bright. A circle of professors and students had gathered, their faces a mix of disbelief and wonder. Some leaned in with notebooks, scribbling every detail, while others whispered questions to one another. For the first time since inheriting the machine, he saw no mocking smiles, only serious curiosity. The professor who had invited him, Dr. Harris, rubbed his chin thoughtfully. I've been teaching engineering for 30 years, he said slowly, and I have never seen anything like this. He pointed to the humming coils and wires. If this is real, and it appears to be, then your uncle may have been working on something decades ahead of his time. His chest swelled with pride. He called it his most important creation, he said softly. Dr. Harris nodded. Well, he wasn't wrong. The test ended after a few minutes as usual. The light dimmed, the hum faded, and the machine fell silent. Some students looked disappointed, but Dr. Harris's eyes still gleamed. Even a few minutes is extraordinary, he said firmly. It proves the principle. The problem now is stability, he agreed. My uncle struggled with that. His notes mention instability after extended use. Dr. Harris tapped the machine lightly. We'll need to run more tests. Would you be willing to leave it here for a few days? He hesitated. The thought of leaving his uncle's machine in other hands filled him with nervousness. But he knew he couldn't fix it alone. He finally nodded. Yes, but please, take care of it. It's all I have left of him. Dr. Harris gave him a reassuring smile. Don't worry. We'll treat it with respect. As he walked out of the lab that evening, the weight on his shoulders felt lighter. For the first time, he wasn't carrying his uncle's legacy alone. The following days were a blur. The university ran test after test. Engineers disassembled parts, measured outputs, and photographed the diagrams from the notebooks. Soon word began to spread. At first, it was only among the faculty. Then students started whispering about the miracle generator. A week later, local reporters showed up. He returned to the lab one morning and found a small crowd gathered outside. Cameras flashed, microphones were shoved forward. Is it true? One reporter asked. Does your machine really create power without fuel? Another shouted, Are you planning to sell it? Is this the future of energy? He froze, overwhelmed. He had never been in front of cameras before. It's my uncle's invention, he stammered. I'm just trying to understand it. That night, the news aired a short clip about him. A local man may be sitting on a world-changing discovery, the anchor announced. The story showed shaky footage of the machine glowing in the lab. Neighbors called, relatives texted, and people he hadn't spoken to in years suddenly wanted to meet. His mother called with worry in her voice. Son, be careful. People get greedy when they hear about things like this. He promised to stay cautious, but deep inside he felt proud. The machine was no longer mocked. It was admired. Soon the attention grew larger than he could have imagined. A famous science magazine published an article. Could this be the first step toward free energy? The article featured pictures of the machine and highlighted his uncle as a forgotten genius. It mentioned his own role in preserving the invention. Overnight, his name was known far beyond his small town. But with attention came pressure. Companies began to call. Some offered money, large sums for the rights to the machine. Others hinted at partnerships, promising research teams and laboratories. He sat at his kitchen table one evening, staring at a pile of business cards. The offers were tempting, but he remembered his uncle's note. It is not just metal. It is an idea. He didn't want to sell the idea to the highest bidder. He wanted to protect it to make sure it was used wisely, but he also knew he couldn't hide from the world forever. One evening, his cousin Peter showed up again. This time, Peter wasn't mocking. He was smiling almost too kindly. I saw you on the news, he said. Looks like Uncle's junk wasn't junk after all. Hey, we're family. Maybe we can work together, share the benefits, you know? He looked at Peter calmly. You laughed at me when I carried it home. Peter shrugged. I was wrong. But come on, don't shut me out now. He shook his head. Uncle trusted me with this, not you. Peter's smile faded into frustration. You think you can handle this alone? The world is bigger than you. Sooner or later someone will take it from you. The words lingered even after Peter left. Could he really protect the machine? A few days later, the university invited him to present at a public conference. The auditorium was filled with scientists, journalists, and curious citizens. He stood on stage beside the machine, his palms sweaty. Dr. Harris introduced him warmly, praising his uncle's dedication and his own persistence. Then it was his turn to speak. He took a deep breath and began. When my uncle passed away, everyone mocked what he left me. They called it worthless. Even I doubted it. But he believed in it. And now, standing here, I see that he was right. This machine may not be perfect yet, but it proves that sometimes the greatest treasures look like junk at first. The audience listened intently. He demonstrated the machine, and the bulbs glowed once again under the bright stage lights. People gasped, clapped, and some even stood in awe. Cameras flashed. For a brief moment he felt as if his uncle was standing beside him, smiling proudly. After the presentation, journalists crowded him with questions. What's next? Will this replace fossil fuels? Can it power cities? He didn't have all the answers. It's still early, he admitted. There's more work to be done. But I promise I will continue for my uncle and for the future. The applause echoed long after he left the stage. That night, he walked home through quiet streets. The noise of cameras and reporters was behind him, but inside his heart was a calm certainty. His uncle's machine was no longer a secret. It was a symbol, and the responsibility to protect and develop it rested on his shoulders. He looked up at the night sky, stars twinkling above. They laughed at you, Uncle, he whispered. But now the world knows. And I won't stop until your work is complete. The machine, once dismissed as worthless, had begun to change everything. But he also sensed that bigger challenges were still ahead. Rivalries, dangers, and decisions that would test his courage. For now, though, he allowed himself a moment of peace. His uncle's dream was alive, and the world had finally seen its light. The days after the conference felt like living in a dream. Everywhere he went, people recognized him. Strangers stopped him in the street, shaking his hand, congratulating him, calling him the man with the machine. Newspapers printed headlines about the inheritance that could change the world. Television stations replayed his speech again and again, but with the sudden fame came an unexpected weight. Each day brought more letters, emails, and calls from companies, scientists, and even governments. Some offered partnerships. Some offered money more than he had ever imagined. A few spoke in vague, threatening tones, warning him not to let the machine fall into the wrong hands. He realized quickly that his mother had been right. People would fight, even betray, for something like this. His uncle had known it too. That was why he had kept it hidden all his life. The thought made him uneasy, but it also strengthened his resolve. He decided to keep the machine under lock and key when not in use. The university helped store it in a secure lab, guarded and monitored. Still he worried. Each time he saw it sitting silently on the table, he felt the heavy responsibility pressing on him. At night, when the world was quiet, he often sat at his desk with his uncle's notebooks. He read them not just for the science, but also for the heart behind the words. Some pages carried notations of frustration, still unstable. Others carried hope, closer than ever. In the margins, he sometimes found little sketches, stars, birds, a cup of tea, reminders that his uncle had been a dreamer as much as a builder. One evening, Anna visited again. She placed a hand on the notebooks and said, "He trusted you, but you don't have to do this alone. You have people now, professors, scientists, me. Don't carry it like a burden, carry it like a gift." Her words touched him deeply. For weeks he had felt like the world's expectations were crushing him. But maybe, just maybe, this was meant to be shared. Not sold, not hidden, shared. The next step was not easy. He formed a small research team at the university with Dr. Harris leading. Together they studied every part of the machine, testing different designs. He watched as experts marveled at the simplicity yet brilliance of his uncle's work. Sometimes he offered his own ideas, born from weeks of trial and error in the garage. Slowly, his uncle's notes and his own experiments began to merge. Progress was slow but visible. The machine could run longer before shutting down. It could power more devices, lamps, fans, even a small heater. Each improvement filled the team with excitement. "We're closer," Dr. Harris said often. "Much closer." But outside the lab, the world grew impatient. Articles demanded answers. Why hasn't the machine been released yet? Some asked, "Is it a hoax?" Others accused. Relatives who once mocked him now came forward, claiming they deserved a share. His cousin Peter even threatened legal action, insisting the inheritance should have been divided. The pressure was immense. Some nights he lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if he had made a mistake showing the world. Would his uncle's dream be stolen? Would it be twisted into something dangerous? One night he dreamed of his uncle. In the dream, the old man was in his shed working quietly, humming to himself. He looked up, smiled, and said, "You can't control everything, but you can guide it. That's enough." When he woke, his chest felt lighter. He realized then that the machine was never meant to make him rich or powerful. It was meant to inspire, to open doors to new possibilities. His role was not to own it, but to protect its purpose. Months passed, and the team finally reached a breakthrough. By adjusting the magnetic coils and adding stabilizers, they extended the machine's runtime from minutes to hours. It wasn't yet ready to power entire cities, but it was enough to light up a small building continuously. When they tested it on the university library one night, the lights glowed brightly without any external power. Students gathered outside cheering. Word spread quickly. "The inheritance machine powers library for 6 hours without fuel," the headlines read. Scientists from other countries flew in to see it with their own eyes. For once, the story wasn't about money or mockery. It was about possibility. He stood in front of the glowing building, watching the faces of students filled with awe. For the first time, he felt truly at peace. His uncle's life's work was no longer hidden, no longer laughed at. It was alive, shining for everyone to see. Relatives still demanded a share, but he calmly refused. "This isn't about family property," he told them. "It's about humanity. Uncle left it to me so I could protect it, not sell it." Some argued, but deep down they knew he was right. Later, at an international conference, he was invited to give the keynote speech. Standing before a hall filled with leaders, scientists, and reporters, he held one of his uncle's notebooks in his hand. His voice trembled at first, but soon it grew steady. "My uncle was a quiet man," he began. "People mocked him. They said he wasted his life. They laughed at the machine he built. When I inherited it, they laughed at me too. But what they didn't see was the heart behind it. This machine is not just metal. It is a message that sometimes the greatest gifts are hidden in plain sight, dismissed as worthless. My uncle believed in a future where energy was not a privilege but a right. Today, I stand here to honor that belief." The audience rose in a standing ovation. Cameras flashed. He felt tears in his eyes but didn't hide them. They weren't just for him. They were for his uncle, who had never lived to see this day. As time went on, the machine inspired new research worldwide. Other scientists began building their own versions, testing and improving. The technology spread, not controlled by one company or government, but shared among many. It wasn't perfect yet, but it was enough to start a new path. Back at home, he sometimes sat quietly in his garage, looking at the empty space where the machine once stood. He missed the hum, the glow of the bulbs, the smell of oil and wires. But then he would look at the notebooks, now carefully preserved, and smile. The world now saw value where once there was laughter. And every time a new article appeared, every time he saw a new experiment inspired by his uncle's machine, he whispered the same words. "You were right. Uncle, they finally see it. The machine that everyone mocked had become a legacy. And he, the nephew who had once carried it home in shame, had become the guardian of that legacy."